oh, I see you on Sabbath, and like, hey, happy Sabbath, kind of the same, how's your week been? Now we know how your week has been because we've been talking to you on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It's not just I'm catching up. Now I have some context to have a real relationship, right? And I have a conversation. So
around certain parts of the world, the conversation in relation to COVID-19 has actually changed. How do we ease policies and rules, and what does going back to normal actually look like? How do we get back to how things used to be? For many people, church is actually a priority, and reopening and making things normal is something that they're wanting. Sam Moreno is a pastor friend of mine who's actually in the middle of the process of reopening his church community. But before we get to that, let's establish where his church has been during the pandemic.
I think it goes back to, well, first the technical, we have to figure that out. That was, it's like an accelerated course. Thank God we have an amazing communications team. They hit the ground running, and they like start from week one, researching and finding ways to make it the transition as easy as possible. So that was probably the first challenge that we encountered. Then it's the buy-in. I think that's the biggest one. This is going to look different than our regular worship. This is going to feel different. But I think having the buy-in from the membership, that has been, it's been slow to come around, but I'm seeing a good trend now. I think it's everyone's concerns, like, am I going to be on a camera? Do I have to talk? Are people going to see me? And we try to minimize that as much as possible. We tell people, like, if you just want to connect and just listen in, you can do that. If you want to just call in and just listen in. A lot of people told us Zoom is not our thing, or we're zoomed out. That's another thing.
Yeah.
That we've got people who for work or just in general, they've just been on Zoom all week. And so that makes it a little bit of a challenge. But the buy-in is just getting past that first step, because the moment they experience it, they say, we want more of this.
Is that true for those who are zoomed out as well?
Yeah, it's been generally the case. I think I've had one or two. And so because of that, we're not just focusing on Zoom. And that was another thing, right? It's not just not one approach. We're trying to approach it from different angles. We said, what about the Instagram crowd who just wants to listen in and maybe connect that way? So Thursday nights, we have that. What about those who tech are not too techy, right? And like, I don't want to download an app on my phone. So we do just a prayer call on twice a week. So that kind of, takes away that obstacle. They could just call in, just share over the phone and not have to install anything. So we've tried to do that, just create different channels, not just stick to one. We've come to the agreement around the table with leadership. The whole point of this whole quarantine is being responsible, showing other people love. And I can appreciate that as a father of a preemie, and you and I have had a conversation about this. We have to be super extra careful with our son, and it's been heartwarming to receive even texts and phone calls from our membership saying, Pastor, don't feel pressured. Or even the first week when we were deciding to close, my elders calling and saying, if you want to stay home, we understand. We want to make sure that he's okay. And to me and my wife, that meant the world to us, because they were thinking about us, they were thinking about our family, and people came before programs. And I think that's what matters.
With all of this groundwork being laid, strengthening connections and even building new communication points, Sam doesn't want these things to go away simply because the church is going back to normal.
Biggest thing that we've talked about, and I think that's great that we started this conversation with this, is we don't want to lose the momentum that we've created for online. We see that like you just mentioned, the points of connection have increased. We don't want that to decrease. We want that to be the new normal now. That we're talking about. So, and this came from our church members who said, man, it's been awesome to be able to connect. One of the biggest challenges with our churches are that we're very much spread out through the PDX and even Washington area, right? We've got people as far as Oregon City and even here in Battleground, different areas. So we've got a pretty big spread. And so we've always been challenged. How do we connect throughout the week when our congregation is so scattered? This has really given us a way.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one thing that when we've talked to leadership, it's, yes, we're going to go back to the physical building, but let's not lose this.
Yeah.
And it's come from so many members who say, we want to continue this. In fact, we want to even continue our relationships with like Vivid and and gather and remix. So that's been very promising for me.
That's super cool. I love that one of the benefits of this whole series of events is that now we have the ability to hit reset.
Yeah.
And you're about to restart, and you have maybe even a little bit more grace and freedom than you ever have had in the past to dream up of what is church and what does church look like. And I'd love to hear from you. What is church for you? What does it look like for you moving forward now?
Yeah, we've always, I think as pastors, we always look at Acts 2 as the model. But sometimes there's challenges to making that a reality. I think this has kind of opened the doors to people to experience what that felt like. And I think it's that first step, right? Once people are through that door and they've experienced it and they've seen what connection can do, especially I think as people have been in quarantine, you can tell, like the moment we jump on Zoom and we see each other's faces, it's like, oh, I needed that. Like I really just needed that connection. And I think since people have gotten a taste of that, of being connected, not just once a week or twice a week, I think the challenges become less and less, or the obstacles become less and less. People already have buy-in to it. And so for me, that's the dream. It's living continuously, not once a week, building relationships throughout the week, staying connected in different avenues. One of the things that has been awesome for me from the moment this started, we separated the church into triads, like groups of 3. And we just said, encourage, just follow up, just text, just connect. And that's helped. That's re-emphasizing Acts 2. It's not, oh, I see you on Sabbath and like, hey, happy Sabbath. Kind of the same, how's your week been? Now we know how your week has been because we've been talking to you on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It's not just I'm catching up. Now I have some context to have a real relationship, right? And to have a conversation. So Acts 2 is the model for us. And I think that can become a reality now.
So with everything in place, Sam is planning on reopening the church. He is paying attention both to the comfort and safety preferences of much of his community, but also he's really listening to those who are wanting things to go back to normal. They're longing for that church experience since they've been missing out all these months. So with the help of his community and with the help of his members, he's learning how to make this transition safe for everyone involved.
We've been blessed also by having, I'd say, members who, through this whole pandemic, they've acquired knowledge because they've had to remain open, essential workers. Whether that's in the medical field, we have someone who works like for PGE, so we've got to keep power on. We've got someone who's involved in ministries during this time, basically buying groceries for elderly, bringing it to their home. Someone running human resources, and all this has helped because they come with experience of how to either transition or what are some of the things that we need to be doing to mitigate risk.
So they're taking what they're experiencing at work, because work hasn't stopped for them. They're saying, okay, if we're going to reopen or when we reopen as church,
correct,
we need to have these implements.
Correct. Yeah. And that's been a blessing. In fact, they formed a task committee. They say we want to kind of spearhead this with the knowledge that we bring from work. And that's been awesome because, again, this is so new to us. But for them, they've been living it every day through these 3 months, close to 3 months, right? So their knowledge has been so beneficial. What are the things that we need to do? What are the supplies? They're even connected with places that we can buy supplies from. We've also been partnering with the churches that we're renting from and saying, hey, how can we do this together? Because we share a space. Because we also not only want to be safe for our congregation, but on Sunday, whenever the congregation meets the next day, we also want to leave it ready for them. So that's been great, partnering and kind of talking through the process, having sanitizing stations, having masks. The big thing right now that we're thinking about is worship, because we keep hearing,
right? Because when you sing, all the particles go into the air.
We're still wrestling with that one.
Okay.
And I think that's been something. One of the angles that we took also as an approach is let's ask other churches. So we've been in talk with other churches. How are you doing it? How has this become a challenge? And that's been helpful because it's great to just kind of pool all of our ideas and resources together. But yeah, worship I think has become a challenging one. The other one that's challenging is children's ministry.
'Cause there's so much touching involved, playing with toys.
Yep.
And what is church without singing? What is church without your kids playing the
Yes.
little instruments or
Yes.
whatever?
Yeah. And families who say that we come to church because children's ministry, right? Because our children feel like home, and children are crying for it right now.
Of
They
course.
want to be at church.
They want to be with their friends.
Yeah.
They want to be playing on the playground or...
And so we've been challenged by that one. How do we approach it? I know that there's been some recommendations from our conference of how to approach it. We're definitely taking those to heart. And yet at the same time, how can we still minister with certain restrictions? So we've taken out, for example, all the toys from the children's nursery to prevent some of that. We've bought more tables to kind of have some more space in between. We want parents to be more involved also. Just so that they'll help the teachers and minimize kind of the stress that's going to create. We used to give out bags that we would at the beginning of the service so that they can basically stay focused, stay on task and engaged. And then they would return, and we can't do that anymore. So now we're looking at maybe disposable bags that they can take home with them. So those are definitely, I think, if I would say the two biggest challenges have been children's ministry and worship. How do we do that? Children's ministry, we're getting a little bit of a handle on. Worship, still working through that. In fact, I have a meeting today, later on today. The first thing I think that we're approaching is how do we come back physically to the temple or to the church, but at the same time have an option for those families who will either A, be afraid to come to church, or B, like you said, medical conditions, right? We were pre-COVID, we were just doing podcasts after the worship service. So 2 days later, we would have the sermon, the whole worship service kind of podcast format. Now we're rethinking that because people want their Sabbath experience. So how do we do that? How do we go live? What is that going to take? What are the changes that are going to be required from our communications team? So I think that's the first thing we're focusing on, is having an option. We can't just say, well, they'll find something. We want them to stay connected. Second is reassuring them. It's if that's your decision, if as a family you've come together, we don't want anyone to feel guilty for staying home. And I think that's one of the biggest things. And again, I just go from my experience. I understand what it feels like to be fearful of this transition, of a family member who may have medical conditions. So I think we've got to show that same empathy for others. And so encouraging them, right? Telling them it's fine if you need another week, 2 weeks to kind of weigh it out and see how it goes. We completely understand. Here's how you can stay connected. And I think that's the approach that we're planning on taking right now. It's keeping the connection, even if they're not physically there. On Sabbath, we take inventory. If we didn't see someone, following up throughout the week and saying, we missed you. Here's how you can stay connected throughout the week in these other ways.
It's hard to believe that things will ever get back to normal, but Sam and his church are really trying. Things might not actually return to how they used to be, but one thing is for certain. With all of this being done, we will have a deeper appreciation for communities and for the connections that we have in church. Sam and his church are listening to the needs of their members, and hopefully with a little bit of help and teamwork all together, they're going to be able to make those accommodations for everybody. I think that there's a lot that we can learn from the strategies that we're learning about and the different things that we're doing and the needs that people have. Especially in today's world, we need to be able to make those changes and to be able to adapt to each other's needs as we learn to listen to each other.